picture this for a second. You at a dinner party or, maybe a networking event, and someone walks up, shakes your hand, and asks you the absolute most common icebreaker in the English language.
Oh, the classic. So what do you do?
Exactly. What do you do? And if I asked you that right now, listening to this, I bet you wouldn't even blink. You would fire right back with your title.
Right. It's just reflex.
Yeah, you'd tell me about the business you built from the ground up, the team you manage, the industry you're disrupting. For decades, that answer has been automatic. It is your business.
Yeah.
It's your title.
It's basically your entire identity.
Right. But here is the massive, gaping blind spot that so many highly successful people share. What happens when I look you in the eye and ask, who are you, when the business is gone?
And that is usually met with just total uncomfortable silence.
Absolute silence. The metal Rolodex just spins and comes up totally empty. So today we are doing a deep dive into some of our own internal company insights here at Succession Strength.
Yeah, and it's something we are incredibly passionate about unpacking for you.
The mission for our conversation today is to pull back the curtain on this hidden silent crisis that is derailing some of the sharpest minds out there. We are talking about the crisis of post-exit identity.
Because being financially ready to step away from your life's work is, well, it's fundamentally different from being personally ready.
I mean, they aren't even in the same universe. So we're going to explore that gap, and most importantly, we're going to look at how to actually measure exactly where you stand before you sign on the dotted line. Okay, let's unpack this.
It's a crucial distinction, and honestly, it's one of the most overlooked aspects of business transitions we see in our internal data.
Right. Because the narrative always seems to focus on the money, doesn't it?
Always. I mean, we see this play out time and time again. A driven leader will spend, 5, maybe 10 years meticulously planning the financial and legal architecture of their exit.
Oh, yeah. They optimize the tax structures. They plot out the operational timeline down to the specific week.
Exactly. They maximize every possible retirement account. But they completely ignore the psychological shift, the identity shift.
It's like they forget they are a human being and not just a spreadsheet.
Right. And then the day comes when the business genuinely doesn't need them to function anymore, and they realize they never actually drew up a blueprint for themselves.
And to take this out of the theoretical and make it real for you listening, I want to talk about a specific case from our own company files. Let's talk about Bill.
Well, Bill's story is just the perfect example of this trap.
It really is. So Bill was 54 years old. He owned a commercial roofing company, and by every single traditional metric we use to measure success, he had won the game.
He was crushing it.
Completely. His business was incredibly profitable. He carried virtually zero debt. He had cultivated this fiercely loyal customer base and built a rock-solid autonomous management team.
Basically, his company was a turnkey operation. Any corporate buyer or private equity firm would pay an absolute premium to acquire it.
Yeah, on paper, he did absolutely everything right. His personal life was totally secure. Estate planning was done. Wealth management strategy was locked in.
His family was completely provided for across generations. I mean, he was the picture of the American dream.
Except for one tiny, invisible detail. He had absolutely no idea what he was going to do with his life the morning after he sold the company.
Which is where things really went off the rails.
Right. So an unsolicited, massive, high-paying offer comes across his desk. Initially, of course, he's thrilled. This is the culmination of his life's work.
But as the paperwork progresses, the questions start creeping in.
Yeah, he starts wondering, what are his days actually going to look like? Who is he if he's not the owner of this roofing empire? What is actually going to compel him to get out of bed on a random Tuesday morning in November?
And because he didn't have answers to those existential questions, his internal anxiety totally hijacked the process.
And this is the part of the story that just blows my mind. He walks away from the deal. An unsolicited, highly lucrative offer that guaranteed his financial freedom forever. And he just abruptly pulls the plug.
He just walked away.
Now, I have to push back here because I am struggling to wrap my head around Bill's thought process. It's like packing perfectly for a massive lifelong vacation, arriving at the airport and realizing you have absolutely no idea what country you're flying to.
That is a great way to look at it.
Why do brilliant, forward-thinking planners suddenly freeze up and fail to plan for themselves? You are telling me a hardened CEO turns down a life-changing offer because he doesn't have a hobby lined up.
Well, what's fascinating here is how the human brain actually processes an undefined future. High performers like Bill have literally spent decades wiring their brains for certainty.
Certainty, control, execution, the things that make them successful.
Exactly. When Bill looks at a financial spreadsheet or a profit and loss statement, that is defined territory. His brain recognizes that as safe.
Okay, that makes sense.
But when he looks out into the psychological void of an undefined identity, a life with no metrics, no goals, and no clear role, his brain doesn't just see a lack of a hobby.
What does it see?
The brain registers that chemical drop in dopamine and certainty as an actual literal threat to survival.
Wait, really? So it's not a logical business decision at all? It's a deeply ingrained fight or flight response.
Precisely. Bill confused financial readiness with personal readiness. The money was ready, without a shadow of a doubt, but the human being was not.
Wow.
And because his brain couldn't picture a safe, structured life after the business, his nervous system's instinct was to retreat back to the environment it knew how to control.
Which was the business.
Right. This psychological panic is actually the most common reason owners delay exits. The money is ready, but the leader is not.
That completely flips the script on how we usually think about retirement.
Yeah.
So since Bill walked away because he couldn't answer those fundamental questions, let's actually dig into what those are.
Yeah, our insights show there are 5 specific questions that most retiring leaders simply cannot answer.
And it's not because they aren't brilliant strategists. It's because nobody has ever forced them to turn that strategic lens on themselves. So let's take question 1.
Question 1 is, how will you structure your time? Think about the mechanics of a CEO's life. Work provides this built-in, mandatory, ironclad structure.
You have Monday morning leadership meetings, quarterly tax deadlines, board reports.
Exactly. Your entire week is architected for you by the relentless demands of the enterprise. When that external structure vanishes overnight, what replaces it?
See, I have to challenge this premise just a little bit. If you ask almost anybody on the street, isn't the entire point of retiring to finally stop having a schedule?
You would think so, yes.
I mean, who wants to trade one corporate grind for another set of mandatory obligations?
Yeah.
Doesn't the idea of absolute boundless freedom sound amazing?
Well, it sounds amazing when you are currently overwhelmed by stress, but the reality is that human beings, and especially highly driven leaders, need a framework.
They need those walls to bounce off of.
Right. Boundless freedom doesn't lead to endless joy. It leads to massive decision fatigue. When you have absolutely no structure, deciding what time to eat breakfast suddenly becomes a monumental task.
Or whether to go to the hardware store, it just feels heavy.
Without a framework, that boundless freedom usually feels like profound disorientation.
Because there's no friction to push against.
Okay.
Okay, so what is question 2?
Even if you schedule your Tuesday with a lunch date and a round of golf to solve the structure problem, you hit question 2. What will give you purpose?
Purpose.
Yeah.
Because for decades, the business was this incredible engine for that.
Yes. It provided a constant daily stream of complex problems to solve, competitors to outsmart, and wins to celebrate. It was feeding their dopamine receptors constantly.
So without the business, where does that chemical reward come from? People always throw out these cliche ideas like, oh, I'll volunteer or I'll spend all my time with my grandkids.
But what we see internally is that most leaders haven't thought any deeper than the concept of just relaxing. And relying on relaxing as a life plan is a deeply dangerous trap.
Because relaxing isn't an identity.
Exactly. Let's define what relaxing actually is. Relaxing is a vacation, and vacations rely on contrast. They feel good because they are a temporary break from your labor.
You cannot build a decades-long identity around the absence of labor.
No, you can't. Relaxing is the absence of stress, but it is unequivocally not the presence of purpose. If we connect this to the bigger picture, purpose isn't about labor, it's about direction.
I love that. You need a compelling reason to get out of bed that goes beyond just occupying space. You can only sip margaritas on the beach for so many days in a row before your high-achieving brain starts begging for a complex supply chain problem.
That is so true. It needs that engagement.
Okay, so we've got the internal issues, structure, and purpose. But here's where it gets really interesting to me. It isn't just about what is happening inside your own head.
Not at all. It's about how your entire external ecosystem, your social circle, and your family is going to react to this change.
Which brings us to question 3.
Right. Question 3 is, how will people see you differently? For 20 or 30 years, you have walked into rooms carrying the invisible weight of the founder, the CEO, the boss.
Let's be brutally honest. People laughed a little harder at your jokes.
They absolutely did. People deferred to your opinions. Your title acted as a social buffer. When that title completely disappears and you were just a civilian, how are people going to treat you?
More importantly, how is your ego going to handle that shift? That has to be a devastating wake-up call for some leaders.
It really is. The sudden realization that maybe some of those country club friends valued the title printed on the business card significantly more than the actual person holding it.
Ouch. Yeah, that stings. And what about the family side of things?
Well, while their professional network might pull away, they discover their family suddenly expects significantly more of them. Because the ultimate trump card, I'm sorry I can't, I have to work, is completely gone.
Which ties right into question 4.
Yes. Question 4, what assumptions are you making? Leaders assume they will be happy, their spouse wants them home all the time, or their successor wants their advice.
Oh, the assumptions. This is where the blind spots are just massive.
They are incredibly dangerous because they're usually entirely false, and you don't discover the truth until after the ink is dry.
Which leads us perfectly to question 5. What will your role be at home? Let's speak candidly here. A lot of these founders have been heavily emotionally distracted for decades.
Physically at the dinner table, but mentally reviewing a term sheet.
Exactly. Now, suddenly, they're going to be present 24/7.
Hmm.
It's like suddenly trying to become a regular cast member on a TV show where your spouse has been the solo lead character for the last 20 years.
I love that analogy.
You can't just walk onto the set on a Tuesday afternoon and start trying to change the script.
No, you can't. And to build on your TV show analogy, not only are you walking onto their established set, you are instinctively trying to step into the director's chair.
Yes. Oh, man, that is so true.
The spouse has meticulously built a highly functional life that operates perfectly well without the leader being home every day. They have their morning routine, their specific way of organizing the household.
Then the retired CEO shows up at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, sits at the kitchen table, and says, so how are we optimizing our schedule today?
And suddenly, your presence isn't a long-awaited gift. It is a massive disruption. This raises an important question about how couples communicate or fail to communicate about this shift.
Going from absent to present requires a real conversation.
It does. A business can be legally transferred in 12 months. Unwinding decades of identity takes significantly longer and requires intentional work.
So we've laid out these massive existential landmines. What happens when leaders just put their blinders on and ignore all of this? They just wing it and leave the business anyway.
The primary fallout is a profound, creeping sense of feeling lost. Not just bored, feeling lost. And when they skip this work, we see them generally go down one of two paths. Path A is drifting.
Drifting, like a ship without a rudder.
Exactly. The person who built an empire cannot figure out what to do on a Tuesday morning. No structure, no purpose. They just fade away.
That's depressing. But then there's path B, which is arguably much more destructive to the actual legacy of the business. Meddling.
Yes. Meddling. Coming back to the office under the guise of helping out.
The ghost of the founder haunting the corporate hallways.
Right. They start undermining the new leadership. The transition that was supposed to be clean starts reversing itself because they fundamentally confuse contribution with control.
Let me ask you this, because this feels like a paradox. Is it possible that the exact same drive that made them an elite CEO is the exact same trait that makes them absolutely terrible at retiring?
100%. High performers are trained fixers. When their own personal life post-exit feels empty, they reflexively try to fix the business they just left.
They step all over the successor's toes.
Yes, but it's important to emphasize this is not a failure of character. It is simply a failure of planning.
That makes so much sense. They are using the wrong tools for the job. So let's pivot to the actionable solution from our internal frameworks. How do we actually evaluate personal readiness?
The foundational rule here is that you cannot answer these questions by guessing. Your blind spots are invisible to you. The first step has to be measurement.
Stop guessing and start measuring.
Precisely. And the solution we utilize is the 15-minute retirement satisfaction survey. It's a diagnostic tool that measures 6 specific dimensions of personal readiness.
Let's quickly break down those 6 dimensions. We have identity and purpose, daily structure, social connections, continued growth, emotional well-being, and the organizational transition.
Right. Taking it before you have a firm transition timeline in place is best.
So it's basically an MRI for your retirement identity. It finds the fractures in your plan before you actually put weight on them. So what does this all mean?
Well, if the diagnostic shows you aren't ready, it gives you time. Time to use a retirement course or advisory support to close those identity gaps.
Early detection is everything.
It is. There is a profound difference between knowing you have enough money and knowing who you will be. The gap between financial readiness and personal readiness is exactly where regret lives.
That is a powerful takeaway. Stepping back from a business is fundamentally an identity crisis disguised as a financial transaction.
It really is. Preparing for it means planning for the person you're going to become, not just managing the capital.
I want to make sure we leave the listener with something to chew on. What's a final thought they can take away from all this?
Think about the metrics you use to measure your success in business: revenue, growth, efficiency. What happens if you try to apply those exact same metrics to your life after the business?
Wow, yeah. That sounds exhausting.
How do you unlearn the habit of measuring your human worth by your daily output? That is the real work of personal readiness.
That is a brilliant question to end on. Thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions and start measuring your own readiness instead of just guessing.
Absolutely. Start measuring today.
Visit successionstrength.com or email info@successionstrengths.com to measure your readiness gap. Follow the Transfer Ready by Succession Strength podcast for more conversations on what it actually takes to prepare a business for succession or sale.